Good afternoon, my name is Dave Norton from Discovering New England History. We're going to begin with episode 3 of the King Philip's War in New England, of course. And it was a period of 1675 to 1676, 14 months. And we'll go to the next slide. Now I'm going to recap a little bit to give you an idea what's going on here. This was the far west, Western Massachusetts, at the beginning of King Philip's War, and the folks that lived out there had little protection, and that was the farthest that the English actually settled back in this period of time. And if you remember, everything out there, they were all getting attacked by the Nipmunks and the Narragansett, and also the Wampanoag. Here's the Wampanoag, Middleborough, Massachusetts. That's one of the areas where the Wampanoags were. The whole settlement was attacked, July 1675. All the English had to flee their homes, women and children, whatever, get into the Thompson garrison house. And the whole town went up in flames. We'll go to the next slide. And then moving way out west, there was a Wampanoag attack on the Russell garrison. August 1675, and that was actually more down in the settlement at South Dartmouth. Over 30 homes were burnt down to the ground, and everyone just fled into the garrison house until the attack was over. We'll go to the next slide. And then also this one here is way out in west now, Brookfield siege, where they burnt down the town, and all the settlers were in this one house in Brookfield, and they had them completely surrounded for almost 40 hours, try to burn them all out. So that was another attack. All these happened within 1 or 2 months. We'll go to the next slide. Then also down in South Deerfield, the Bloody Brook Massacre occurred, September 1675, where a wagon train with all kinds of food supplies the settlers were taking came down there, stopped for a break, and they were just ambushed and completely massacred. We'll go to the next slide. So that's what was going on, and of course everyone in the over here in the Mass Bay Colony, Plymouth Colony, all knew all about this, and they were all terrified. So Hadley, Massachusetts, that was also in September 1675, but that has a kind of an interesting story to it. What happened was they surrounded the town, the Nipmunks surrounded the town, and they went house by house and started torching it. And all of a sudden, from nowhere, the people didn't know what to do, because these houses were spread out, and they couldn't communicate, they couldn't get together, whatever. Out of nowhere, this elderly gentleman, probably 80 years old, with a long beard, came out, and he got them all together. He went house to house, and nobody knew who he was. And he got all the men together, got all their rifles together, they got actually muskets together, and he got all the women and children, put them in a safe spot and everything like that, and they just fought off the attack. So if we can go back to that slide, it's an incredible story. You can see these pictures there. There he is here on the left, and the settlers of Hadley didn't know what in the world they were going to do when they got attacked. And there he is in the middle of the attack, urging everybody on. And they called him the Angel of Hadley, because without him, everyone probably would have been killed and massacred. And it's really interesting, because after the battle, if you will, was over, he completely disappeared. Nobody knew who he was, and he completely disappeared. So I did a little research on it. His name was William Goff, and apparently he was a general over in England earlier in his lifetime, and for some reason he left England to go into to hide, or he was banished from England. Came over here. He was hidden here in Hadley, in a church by a minister, and that's where he lived for many years. Nobody knew anything about him. They protected him because they knew if the English would catch him, they would probably send him into prison. And so once everything started, they were attacked. I guess his military bearing kicked in, and he went around house to house, saved everybody, and then he completely disappeared. And they said no one knew what happened to him. They couldn't thank him or do anything. And they said some accounts have him turning up later on in southern Connecticut and dying there. It's quite a story, and the whole town calls it the Angel of Hadley. Interesting story. Go to the next slide. Now, at that same time, December 1675 was incredible because all the towns out west were getting hit, and families were thrown out in the middle of the winter, and their homes were all burnt down. And King Philip wanted to really build up his alliance. And he already had the Wampanoags with him, and the Narragansetts weren't really with him at this time. Nipmunks were, and he wanted to get the Mohawks. So King Philip took 500 of his braves, made the trek all the way into eastern New York, just around Western Massachusetts, that area, to try to get the Mohawks to side with him. And a lot of the historians now agree that this was the turning point in King Philip's war. What happened, he went up there with 500, and the Mohawks wanted nothing to do with it. They wanted nothing to do with this fight, and they were very aggressive warriors. So they attacked King Philip with his 500, and they killed over 250 of King Philip's warriors. So King Philip regrouped and left and started going back down, and knew that he could not get the Mohawks on his side. And historians agree, if he had united together the Wampanoags, the Narragansetts, the Nipmunks, and the Mohawks, at this point in history, they easily would have won King Philip's war, because they had every town in Western Massachusetts was completely hit, and everyone was in a panic. We'll go to the next slide. Now, we're going to go here, also December 1675. Important part here, there's a meeting house site in Rumford, Rhode Island. There's a picture of it, and there's a nice memorial right there. And what they did is they were gathering. Now they had to gather some troops. Benjamin Church was involved, and he said, we've got to get organized. We've got to get all our militias together, and instead of letting everyone burn our houses down, we've got to take the fight over to the Native Americans, and that was what this whole operation was. So we'll go to the next slide. And there's, of course, the famous Ring of the Green that we talked about in previous episodes. December 1675, militia from all over, actually Massachusetts and part of Rhode Island, they all got together here. 685-man force. And they were from the Massachusetts Bay Colony and from the Plymouth Colony. They all got together at this assembly area at the Ring of the Green in Rumford, Rhode Island. Go to the next slide. And I wanted to show these again because these are the original Ring of the Green house sites. And of course, these were all burnt down later on in the war. You can see there's Samuel Newman's house and Caleb Abel's house, Philip Walker. Those are the foundations that these present homes have been built right up on top of the same foundations, just to give you an idea where all this happened. And we'll go to the next slide. Now, they all got together on the Ring of the Green. Plymouth Colony, they contributed 158 militia. Now, to take it for different towns all around, rather than protect their own town, they decided, no, we're going to do this. We're going to create an organization. In Massachusetts Bay Colony militia, 527 soldiers. So they all marched to the Ring of the Green. And of course, there's a picture on the left Benjamin Church. He's the one that got a lot of this together. We'll go to the next slide. Now, I did some research here, and what they did is in the dead of winter, of course, in December, the first step is they marched from the Ring of the Green all the way to this Seekonk River. And according to research, they had to cross this river in the dead of winter. Now, here's a picture looking at from west, looking down to the east bank. And they said it was the site of the first red bridge. And you can see that's where it is right there, not the present one that's there today. And you can imagine 685 militia all there, and they all had to make rafts to get across the Seekonk River. And we'll go to the next slide. And this is what, looking from where they were, looking west, same river. You know, it's really hard to say in history how wide that river is, because I'm sure they didn't have any dams on along the river at that point in history. So we'll go to the next slide. And this shows you an idea here. They sent scouts across to make sure there weren't any Native Americans on the other side of the river. So you can imagine the river with freezing in December, with all the ice they had to go. Dead of winter. We'll go to the next slide. Along the way, what they were going to do is they were going to attack individual Narragansett villages and on their way down. And their target, of course, was ultimately in the Great Swamp Fight area down in South Kingston, Rhode Island. So they stopped off here where Chief Pummum, his fort site, and they weren't there. They had been up north somewhere. And I found this monument indicating where Chief Pummum's fort site was. It's in Warwick, Rhode Island. And we'll go to the next slide. Now you can imagine, think about that, marching from Providence all the way down to Wickford in the snow to assemble and ultimately attack the Narragansett Fort. The idea was they got information that it was a large fort where all the Narragansett warriors were. And rather than wait for them to attack all their communities, they were going to take the attack back to them. We'll go to the next slide. And they all gathered here, Wickford, Rhode Island. That house is still there. It's called Smith Castle. And they had the picture of it in the winter. You can imagine that's what it is. Now you also had a group from Connecticut, and you also had some Mohegans that were on the other side here of the English. And we'll go to the next slide. So their first assembly area on the left, of course, that's Samuel Newman's house, Ring of the Green. The second assembly area now is they're down in Wickford, and that's over on the right, Smith Castle. Commander-in-chief of all these forces was General Josiah Winslow, and the commander of the Plymouth Colony was William Bradford Jr. He had 158 soldiers. The Massachusetts Bay Colony, Samuel Appleton, 527 soldiers. The Connecticut Militia, Robert Treat, who eventually became governor of Connecticut, 315 soldiers. They also had 150 warriors, Mohegan warriors on their side. Total of a little over 1,000 militia ready to strike in Narragansett. We'll go to the next slide. And you can imagine all these folks marching down from Smith Castle all the way to South Kingston through all of this wooded areas and heavy snow. And Captain Benjamin Church was in the advance. He was the militia scout. And the colonists at the time, of course, they had, in this area, in these areas here, they were really concerned about the Wampanoags. And then they were really concerned about if they're going to get a greater alliance. The Narragansetts and Mohawks, etc. So they to protect their families and towns, they took this action. So we'll go to the next slide. Now, what happened here is in Narragansett, their fort, it's called the Great Swamp Fight, and it was right in the middle of a swamp, which is okay in general in times because the swampy water, who wants to essentially attack through that? And the fort is very well protected. You got to remember, this was now the middle of December, and all this swampy area, like here in this picture, was all frozen over. So all you had to do was basically walk over it to attack the fort. We'll go to the next slide. And that's what they did. They went across the swamp. There's a section of the stockade around this Narragansett Fort that was not finished, and they just breached the wall right there, came through. Extreme hand-to-hand fighting. You can see some of the pictures of that. I mean, you're talking 1,000 militia against many Narragansetts. The problem with that, though, it was great. It was a fort, but it also was the home to the women and children of the Narragansett tribe. We'll go to the next slide. So what happened here after they actually won this battle? Now what do we do? And so they had a meeting of all the different militia sections. And William Bradford said, listen, we've marched all the way from Rumford, Rhode Island, all the way down here, and we fought this tremendous battle. A lot of the Narragansett forts, or weetus, if you will, huts, are still here. I vote that we stay here tonight. And the others, the Major Treat from Connecticut, said, no, we want to torch everything. And there's a picture there on the right, which was probably the worst decision ever made. And they set fire to the whole place. Now they had to get back, march through the heavy snow, all the way through the woods, back to Smith Castle. And Benjamin Church, during this attack, at various times in the attack, he ended up being shot 3 times, but he was still helping out here. I'll go to the next slide, just to give you an idea. The long road march through the heavy woods all the way back to Wickford, and by now, a lot of the Narragansetts were waiting. They were waiting for them. They knew which way they're going to come. And you can see that picture on the left, and they just absolutely poured fire on them. So you can see what they had to do, had to march through, and they were just getting picked off one after another after this tragic battle. We'll go to the next slide. But the group made it back to Smith Castle, Wickford, Rhode Island, back in the dead of winter. We'll go to the next picture. And there's a monument for the Plymouth Colony. And interesting, I did some research. The folks that were from Rehoboth on the Ring of the Green, I wanted to find out if any of those participated in the fight, and I found all this out right here. And a lot of these names, family names, are quite familiar. Henry Bowen, Matthew Fuller, John Fitch, he was wounded. John Miller, John Redway, he was wounded. Thomas Kendrick, he was wounded. John Carpenter, Jonathan Sabin, John Reed, Samuel Hunt, John Jacob, Thomas Hunt. So from this particular area, it was known as Rehoboth. They all participated in this Great Swamp Fight, or Great Swamp Massacre. Go to the next slide. And that's a picture of the site. The memorial was put up there. And just to give you an idea, the Colonial what happened here, the Colonial Militia, and of course these facts are, general facts. It's kind of hard to categorize how many were actually killed or wounded. But anyway, according to historians, 70 of the Colonial were killed, 150 were wounded. Narragansett tribe, 97 warriors were killed, and 700 non-combatants were killed, and those are women and children. Terrible. In the dead of winter, they torched all the huts. And that's a memorial right there. Go to the next slide. Now, what's it look like today? Well, the Smith Castle is still there in Wickford, and I took that. There's a picture of it. And of course, that's where they all came. And I'll go to the next slide. And there's a section there in the woods around Smith Castle. It's a mass grave of the 40 Colonial Militia that were shot on the way back after the attack. And of course, they had to carry the wounded, and they marched all the way back here, and they carried them back, and they buried them in a mass grave. That's a memorial right there. Go to the next shot. And you can see there, 40 Colonial soldiers were buried in one grave who died in the swamp fight or in the retreat march, December 1675. Go to the next slide. And Captain John Gallo, he was there, and that's a special monument for him. He was killed, and they brought him there, and that's his site, the Smith Castle. Of course, Smith Castle is in Rhode Island. We'll go to the next slide. And that's the monument, which you can see today. It's way out in the woods. It's well marked how to get to it. And that's a solid piece of granite, 26 feet tall. Very tragic massacre. We'll go to the next slide. Now, also around this time, winter's still upon us here. In February, the calendar year changed to 1676. And now they've got the Narragansett certainly in the alliance. And Lancaster, Massachusetts was attacked. And this was an incredible story. They had Mary Rowlandson. She's famous. We'll talk about how this story ends future, probably next episode. But anyway, they attacked the town. And before they attacked the town, her husband was a minister. And he knew something was coming, so he told his wife and children, be safe in this house. I'm going to go to the up near Boston and get a militia force and tell them that we need help here protecting our town. But while he was away, they completely attacked the town. They massacred all the men, and the women and children they collected together and had them in captivity. So Mary Rowlandson, that's the picture on the right, her daughter was shot, but she wanted to protect her daughter, so she wrapped her daughter up and she marched through the woods with them, just with her daughter and the other group of 14 settlers were killed, 23 women and children were captured. And of course the town was all set ablaze on fire. Go to the next slide. Now we come to Medfield. There's another town that was attacked. And the Narragansett Nipmucks, they did a great job in how they, tactically, how they got this town. What they did in February 1676, here's a picture of the Peak House, which was rebuilt after the attack. The houses are so spread out. So what the Narragansett Nipmucks did is the night before, in the dead of night, they went to each house, they had a group at each house, just waiting outside the house. All these houses, 30, 40, 40 or so houses. And they were very quiet. And then on the, somebody gave the signal, so all 40 of these houses, which were spread out in Medfield, were all attacked at once, and therefore the settlers could not get together to form a militia. And this was an incredible battle also. Medfield was completely destroyed. Over 30 houses were burnt to the ground. We'll go to the next slide. And there's a site of what they call the Peak House. That's still there. You can revisit it. It was rebuilt. 30 houses were burnt to the ground. Everyone was, you can imagine here, all the English settlers in all the towns in this area, all these towns were getting hit and burnt down. It was a really a terrifying spot to be in back in this time. Go to the next slide. And I took some pictures of the house there. You can see the stone foundation. That's classic. That's the original foundation of the house. We'll go to the next slide. Some of the windows there, I did some research. Those are actually glass that came from England, and that was the only thing left when they torched the house. And they put it all back and reconstructed it. Okay, we'll go to the next slide. And once again, there's the side of the house. Almost looks like what it would done there. So we're going to stop right here for a minute. And once again, I got a couple of books here that I use as my source documents. King Philip's War, and this other book right here, which tells you all the soldiers that fought in what battles and everything. Great source book. So we're going to continue on with episode 4 of King Philip's War. And once again, it's Dave Norton. Have a good evening.